Kia ora tātou, everybody. I thought today, because of the turmoil that has confronted us here in Wellington involving our Pipitea campus and the turmoil that we're seeing in other parts of the world and Ukraine at the moment, it wouldn't be inappropriate to start with a karakia that talks about the need to calm the winds and that looks forward to a bright dawn and a new day. So many of you will know the karakia I'm proposing to use. If you wish to join me, by all means do. Whakatakate hou ki te uru, whakatakate hou ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, e hiako ana ti ata kura, e tio hihuka, he hu hu, ti hei Māori ora. Thank you for joining us at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, for this recognition event for Professor Grant Guilford, our Vice-Chancellor for many years, a man who has had a huge impact on this city, on our country, and of course on this remarkable institution, our university. You're going to hear from Grant in just a moment. He has a presentation. He tells me PowerPoint will take some considerable time, after which we'll take questions, and that's the hand function that some of you have already been using. If you raise your hand, we should be able to make sure that we can get your question in, and Grant has time to answer it. I started by referencing the big challenges that we're confronting in our city at the moment with COVID and obviously with the protest. And last night, when I had my normal weekly catch-up with Grant and with Jennifer Windsor, who will be acting Vice-Chancellor once Grant leaves, you would not have known that Grant was retiring from the role. There was absolutely no indication. He was completely focused on the COVID challenge of feeding 1,000 students who were locked down in their rooms, isolating as a consequence of having confronted, having had COVID. And he was completely focused on the challenges for both staff and students in navigating the closure of the Pipitea campus and how we relocated people, how we navigated that particular challenge. In our conversation last night, he was talking as much about the big projects that we're currently implementing, the Living Pa, the National Music Centre, those projects that are going to define the university going forward, and giving me clear instructions about how they were to be implemented. We were talking about the future of pedagogy and the future of the impact of technology on the institution as we move forward, how international forces were going to shape the future of universities, and what the opportunity for a place-based institution like Te Herenga Waka was going to be in that future. There was no indication of retirement. There was no indication of lack of focus. There was no lack of understanding who was in charge. And that has been my experience of Grant since I first met him when he joined the university. He is a person of real vision. He is a person of real vigor and real commitment. He has a depth of intellect and understanding that enables him to wrestle with complex issues and find a way through. But he is also a person who from the outset and always understands that universities are primarily about the student and about the academic. And he's been consistently focused through his time on ensuring that the institution that he is building will actually meet the needs of current and future students and will attract the excellent academics that we need to teach them and to undertake the research on which that teaching is based. In his time, of course, he's confronted not just protests and pandemics, but earthquakes and all manner of other challenges. These are complex institutions to lead, as many of you know. They're places where we have deep intellectual rigor and we have youthful enthusiasm and exuberance, and we're always at the cutting edge because the young people, year by year by year, bring the cutting edge to us. So it's complex territory. It takes great wisdom, great courage, great fortitude, great resilience. In all of that, Grant has demonstrated. And I can think of no better recognition of his success in this university. You can look at it in terms of what he's achieved in building our rankings. You can look at it in what he's achieved in building out the number of students that we have, building the presence of the institution in our city, looking at our research and the PBRF success that we've had, looking at the key big projects, capital projects, the buildings that he's constructed. But I can think of no better test that when we're looking for a new Vice-Chancellor, we have a very strong cohort of internal candidates who are legitimately and properly contesting for that role. And that speaks to me about his leadership. That speaks to me about his focus on people. And I just want to say to you, Grant, this evening, I'm extremely privileged to have had a chance to work with you in many different guises over the years of your Vice-Chancellorship. I greatly respect the work you've done. I do recognise the significant stress it's placed on you and on Pauline and on your family in the time that you've been leading the institution. But I think you can be extraordinarily proud of your achievements, and we are extraordinarily proud of you and what you have contributed to this institution. So with those preliminary words that I hope were appropriate, I'll ask Grant now to address us.
Thank you, John. I think they were more than appropriate, so thank you very much for that and greatly appreciated. Folks, I'm going to share my screen in a moment and just amble through a brief PowerPoint description of the last 8 years and some of the key challenges facing the university. I am in the middle of a fairly significant multitask at the moment. So if I go silent, that's because we've just had 20 minutes ago an arson attack on the law faculty as the police were clearing out the protests. So if I have to disappear, I'll hand over to John, and I'm sure John will do a fine job in finishing this presentation. But let me go to the presentation now, and I'll just share the screen. So hopefully you can all see that. John, can you pick that up and others coming through? Yeah, good, thank you. So what I'm going to do is just take you a bit back to the strategic context of the university. This is the context that's been defining the actions that we've taken over the last 8 years. And of course that has changed over time, but some of the key features of that remain. I'll talk briefly about how we have weathered the COVID-19 epidemic, some of the recent highlights, and finish with just a word on the 125th anniversary, and then of course throw it open to you for discussion, questions, comments, criticisms, whatever you want to dish up my way. The context is on the slide and the next one, a rapidly globalizing tertiary sector with elite brands operating across borders. I'll just say that again, a globalizing tertiary sector with elite brands that operate across borders. And they do that, of course, because with the advent of online or blended education. And so the great brands of the world, the great universities of the world are now in our backyard and in the backyard of all New Zealand universities. For us to continue to develop and continue to have a world-class university in New Zealand and in our city, we need to be able to compete now with these top brands. And that in turn requires significant ambition, and it requires a level of differentiation and positioning, which we'll come to spend a little bit of time on in a moment. The greater use of online or blended education is not just a reflection of this globalization trend, but also the fact that a large cohort of New Zealanders want accessible education in their employment. So we're not just anymore about a school leaver population. We must also be thinking about the adult learner, and that adult learner values accessibility over the campus experience that the school leaver values. International education, you've been in the news a lot, of course, with the closed borders, but that has precipitated an emerging trend prior to that, which is to pivot to transnational education rather than onshore delivery. And so you've seen some of the large universities around the world begin to open campuses offshore to deliver online programs, and some of those students never set foot in the parent campus or in the parent country. So a very different type of international education, one that perhaps is not as valuable for our country, but still is of value to the university and of some value to New Zealand. Public funding has been falling behind rising costs each year. That's a gap of around about 2%. And each year the university has to go out and find a way to plug that 2% gap between the amount of public funding that enters the university and the rising costs of the institution, which of course are based primarily around labour costs. There's a trend towards disaggregation of the research-led teaching nexus that defines universities. This has defined universities for hundreds of years. The idea that you have a research active academic in front of you who is teaching you. This is a very amazing model. It's the best teaching model possible. You have those modern days explorers that excite you about your subject areas, but unfortunately it's an expensive model. And as a result of the public funding that is falling behind, there are different questions being asked about whether that's a model that we can sustain into the future. You're also seeing the research programs pivot away from being curiosity-led, disciplinary-based projects into these large multidisciplinary programs that are mission-led, focused on real world issues like climate change, applied research, if you like, backed up by deep verticals in the fundamental research that's brought together in that multidisciplinary complex. We're also, of course, confronting in our country and others decolonisation and the increased importance of the culturally responsive pedagogies, a growing need for accessible lifelong learning, which I've touched on already, the looming threats from poor planetary stewardship, in particular climate change, but many other things such as a loss of biodiversity, a tremendous rise in mental health challenges amongst our students. We've referred to this regularly as a tsunami, and that's the way it feels when you are confronting this challenge in a university setting. The inequality-induced fractures in social cohesion in our country, partly playing out on our parliamentary precinct at the moment, partly driven by those type of challenges. And then strong headwinds for the elitist, self-centered, global corporate type of university, the university that's all about itself and not about its communities. And it's that global civic university that we've spent the last 8 years trying to build, that university that focuses on its community first and on itself second, with a view to sustaining that community and that university through that virtuous cycle of a relationship of a strong community and a strong university. So briefly on COVID, the COVID crisis has sharpened or certainly expanded on many of those challenges I've just mentioned in that strategic context. It has caused a large drop in revenue that was exacerbated by the particular challenges of closed borders. It forced a rapid change to dual or synchronous online learning, again, picking up on that challenge of universities moving to this transnational education anyway. It resulted in a rethink of our operating model because we did not have the revenue to drive the current model. And so we had to think carefully about how we might be more efficient and how we might replace those lost revenues. And that led to a few changes that were already in the wings. The old idea about good ideas lying around, we picked those up and utilised those very quickly. And that included things like teaching intensive career paths instead of research intensive career paths, and the launch, of course, of Wellington Uni Professional, which is our startup company focusing on lifelong learning, adult learning, and something that we're going to be very proud of in the future as it develops a focus on the lifelong learning needs of Wellington and the wider Wellington region. On the upside, we weren't travelling, and so we found that we could our carbon emissions reduced dramatically, and we're a long way towards our carbon neutral plan as a result of that simple act of being able to travel less. So through all of that, we've managed to maintain the academic progress of our students, which was our #1 goal. We wanted to make sure that we could predict their progress towards their degrees, and overall, that has been achieved. A lot of support required around the dual learning approach, which put a lot of workload pressure on staff, but also on technology grants and hardship grants and accommodation discounts and various flexible approaches to assignment deliveries and all the things that we had to rework to ensure that during that crisis we could keep people going towards their degree. Despite all those challenges, our staff have been marvellous. 95% of our teachers assessed as good or very good or excellent by the students, even during those difficult times of COVID. We provided fees-free study to more than 420 Wellingtonians whose work and life were disrupted by the pandemic. And we did, in the end, improve the resilience of our operating model, opened up new market opportunities by pivoting transnationally into a range of different countries, and have returned the university to surplus. But please note that was at a cost of about 200 full-time jobs through voluntary redundancy. And now, of course, we're in the middle of Omicron. We've gone from a handful of positive cases on Friday morning last week to about 640 yesterday in the halls, and we're up to about 820 today. That's been a real challenge because that means we've gone from about 1,000, it's from people coming to our dining halls to eat to suddenly having to find ways to feed 1,000 people in our halls of residence in their rooms, isolated, to care for them, to make sure that they are not misjudging their symptoms, to find ways to entertain and look after them so that they're not going spare in those rooms. So the sudden rise from that small number of cases to 1,000 people locked away in their rooms has been quite a challenge. Not so much from Omicron, more from the fact that finally we got a hold of our rapid antigen tests and we're able to get a true prevalence of the positive cases in our student population. We've also developed significant cash reserves to weather this remaining year, so that will see the university through this year. We've got our vaccine mandates in place, all the public health protocols as we needed to put in place, contingency plans for all of our essential services. We had to start up some private diagnostic services once we realised we couldn't rely on the government services to surveil our population, our critical services in particular, and we've got all of our in-house contact tracing in place. The occupation of the Pivotier campus has been a further complication because it pressurised all of our facilities, and we needed those facilities to be not under pressure so we could achieve the social distancing. So that's added to the complexity of things. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. Omicron will peak soon by the look of things in our place within a couple of weeks. We are seeing firm messages from government about when the borders will reopen. And as long as the visa settings are competitive with other countries, we should be able to rebuild our international education again and get back to that stage of building that global tolerance of our students by exposing them to people from up to 100 countries, which was where we were when we finally had to move into this current border closure situation. Just a couple of recent highlights from the last few years. I just touched on this briefly, and I won't go into this greatly, but it is very important when you're competing with 18,000 other universities in the world, included amongst those being the 30 or 40 elite university brands that can reach your community, that you know what you stand for, that you have an identity. And we have worked hard at that. Our identity it began with the picking up the idea from Robert Stout of being a civic university supporting Wellington and the Wellington region. We revitalised that, saying actually modern universities aren't just about our city. We want an impact on their world. We want our New Zealand ideas to be considered and promulgated internationally. We want our staff to be world leading. And so we coined this term global civic. But we've finally come home with the most recent iteration of that, and that is a global civic university with our Mariah at our heart. This is our EHO, our essence. It is solidly supported by the members of our university community, and I feel that we have finally coined who we are with that term. We aren't just a Western institution. We're a Western institution in New Zealand, and our bicultural society embedded in that treaty framework. That's who we are, and that's who we need to live. When we talk about that essence and we talk about it in our marketing language, our positioning, if you like, in the market, we refer to ourselves as New Zealand's globally ranked capital city university, a phrase which resonates with our stakeholders. This was touched on briefly by John, but our research is flourishing. We've retained the crown of being the top ranked university for research quality in New Zealand. This is critical, as I've mentioned, because that brings those latter-day explorers, those enthusiasts with the cutting edge of their knowledge into the classrooms, giving a world-leading education in our city. We've also managed to grow our research income dramatically from about 32 million in 2017 up to 87.4 now. That is important because that's a measure of research relevance. You don't grow your research revenue unless you're asking the big questions in your disciplines and therefore getting the Marsden grants. You don't grow your research revenue unless you are undertaking work that solves the problems and captures the opportunities of government, of business, of society. And so this measures research relevance, PBRF measures research excellence, and we've got both. You have a world-class research-led institution in your city. Our teaching too is thriving. In spite of those closed borders, we've continued to grow. We need to grow. We need to grow for our city to bring the talented minds into our city so that we have access to talented labour. We also need to grow for the university because we're only just at scale now. We need to be probably about a third bigger than we are to be comfortable with the current funding model in New Zealand. And so we do have to steadily grow over time to ensure the university's financial sustainability. But each time we add students, we add staff, and we add our ability to contribute to our country and to our city and to the research that's required across the world. We've been very committed to having a role that mimics the society in which we operate. We now have finally reached 2,000 Maori equivalent full-time students. That's equivalent to just under 12% of the domestic student role. And similarly, we're up now at 6.5% of the role as our Pacifica students. We still have work to do here. That's not where we should be as a nationally ranked institution. That's around about where the Wellington region is, but that's we still need far significant increases on our Maori and Pacifica enrolments to mimic the national demographics around us, which is our goal. Why are we thriving in our teaching? Well, the key reasons is that the students who come here love not just the university, but they love our city. It's that combined experience that draws students to our city. We also have been able to expand the subject offerings that we offer, so we meet subject area preferences, and the notable thing here has been the growth of engineering. Yes, we have an engineering faculty here. We have an amazing engineering faculty here, but most people in Wellington still would not be aware of that. And of course, the addition of the new Faculty of Health, which is going great guns, and that broadens the choices students can make. This institution has always been very good at providing the flexibility to students. 70% of our students who arrive here in the first year do not know what will inspire their future. They're still searching for themselves. They're still searching for the subjects that will be the things that will inspire their next career and their life from here. We provide them the flexibility to explore and to discover that. And when they do look out, you see them just thrive once they've struck that area that inspires them. We also work to find this very difficult balance between the employment readiness required by employers, but the future employability required by a graduate that is going to spend 40 years in the workforce. And of course, those are two different things, and the idea of citizenship. And universities feel very strongly about that, but particularly this university. Our job is not just employment-ready graduates, it's also citizens who participate in a democratic society, who are global citizens and understand what's happening in the world. To do all of that, we have a mantra around not just cultivating intellectual capital, i.e. knowledge, but also social capital and that creative capital that comes from being challenged in the lectures, challenged in the tutorials, challenged in our city and being part of that creative and entrepreneurial city that we have a privilege to work in here. One thing for the future that I've challenged John with, as he touched on, we are now working through taking that iho, that essence of being a global civic university with our marae at our heart, and saying, how does that translate to our graduate outcomes and our curriculum? How are we going to ensure that all of our graduates have a knowledge of te reo Māori, of Mātauranga Māori, of the treaty, the history of Aotearoa throughout our curriculum? And so that's a big challenge, one that'll be an interested bystander watching from the sidelines. At the heart of a civic university is engagement and partnerships. I'm proud of the progress we've made on this with our city and our region, and with people and organisations across the world. There are far too many to mention, but just to give you a flavour of that, the Miramar Creative Centre in the film industry in Wellington. The Taihanoa Partnership Program, we now have signed agreements with 80 iwi and iwi-related organisations where we co-fund scholarships, teaching initiatives, research initiatives with those iwi. And that's by far the most successful partnering program with iwi across our nation. It's a fantastic achievement that Rowinia Higgins and her team have created for our university and for our community. Our alumni have got together in the Innovation Booster Partnership with Wellington Uni Ventures to fund some of the intellectual property that comes out of the university so it takes root in Wellington. This is critical. Local funding helps the ideas generate here go into local startups that employ local people and continue to develop the city from here. A wonderful partnership with the Maligan Institute that's long-standing, a fundamental science partnership that's played a very important role in the management of the COVID epidemic here. And internationally, we're in partnership with Berkeley around ensuring a good student experience for research-intensive universities. We're in the Harvard MIT-led edX program, which is a platform whereby now 60 universities provide international online education and share each other's courses. And numerous offshore universities. The one I'll pick out is just a relationship with a university in Beijing, which allows us now to have a study centre in Beijing to support that transnational education and provide pastoral care to our students offshore that I touched on earlier on. And another thing that's been very important to me, and that is ensuring that we get the voice of our academics as an engaged university into the public discourse. And so through that, to achieve that, we've developed partnerships with the newsroom and of course the conversation, and that those opportunities have been our staff have availed themselves of, and we are much more present in those conversations than we used to be. I mentioned the challenges of the environmental future. We are going to be a zero carbon university by 2030, net zero. That'll include a 40% reduction in our gross emissions in that short period of time. We're well on the journey. It's not just the air travel that I mentioned, but switching out our boilers from gas boilers to electrical, use of offset to buy us time to make those changes, and insetting through the development, we hope, of a carbon forest, which will be coming to John's council in the not too distant future as one of the new initiatives to help us get to carbon zero. And that's an Indigenous forest of up to 600 hectares to help us on this journey towards carbon neutrality. Our facilities, of course, are improving as well. A massive capital renewal program helped by that controversial Korori campus sale. We're able to reinvest that in our scholarship programs and in strengthening our buildings and modernising our building and getting onto the leaky roofs that were plaguing our staff. And of course, you see the signature programs such as those that many of you have been involved with who are on this call, particularly Dame Carey, National Music Centre and Civic Square with the Wellington City Council and NZSO. We are planning still that new engineering and science precinct and access route to Kelburn through 320 the Terrace. I'll come back to that briefly in a moment. The living power development to underpin physically this idea of having the marae at the heart of the campus and our commitment to sustainability. And of course, for our Pacifica community, getting behind the Whale Trust that a number of you on this call are involved in to ensure that we can anchor this city's role in the Pacifica communities of New Zealand, but also in the Pacifica communities of the wider Pacific that we are part of. So this is an amazing and inspiring project that I'm sure will eventually get across the ground on our waterfront here. National Music Centre, I won't say much about, you probably will know about it, but I'm very pleased with progress now. We are now masters of our own destiny. We can get on and get this done. Our council has signed off on the investment required, and through Kerry and the foundation, we have raised very significant funds to ensure that we are able to complete this project without making the university destitute. So thank you very much, Kerry, for that. The terrace, this is what the design of the building looks like, and we do hope to still achieve this. We have been set back by the heritage status that was recently accorded to the Gordon Wilson Flats, but we are working through that, and we do still intend to be in the Environment Court in the not too distant future, with a view to demolishing that building so that we can begin to create a future-focused front door for the university on the edge of the city, enlivening that edge, but also providing this pathway through to the university that's a safe pathway for our students and staff to get up to the Kelvin campus. And then getting near the end, folks, just a big thanks to our alumni and friends. We have a very generous alumni and friends group. When I got to the university, we were plodding away at this, making steady progress, but we did decide with the ambition of the council at the time to launch a campaign. We targeted $100 million, and given that was our first campaign, we've had to stretch that stretch target up to 150, and this year we will hit $150 million raised by and from the members of our alumni and friends group in Wellington and New Zealand and around the world. So that's a very inspiring thing for staff and students to see the investment and through that investment, the investment in the public good mission of a university. That to see the fact that people care about students and about their futures and about the research that we do and the issues that we're confronting. So beyond the money, it's the fact that people are caring about our mission, caring about our purpose, and caring about those students and staff. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to all of you who've contributed your own investments into those outcomes. And then lastly, we're coming up to 125 years in December this year. I'm confident that this university will thrive into the next 125 years, and I'm sure that the city and region will continue to benefit from the incredible staff and students of this institution, who year in, year out enrich the life of our capital and that wider region, and simply make this world a better place. So thank you very much. That was all I wanted to say. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.